All right, welcome, friends. Good to see you all. We'll get started in just a minute or two. Give folks a chance to log on. And as you are joining, we're going to put a sign-in sheet in the chat, and we ask that you go ahead and fill that out so we know who's on the call today. Give it another minute or so before we get started. Karen just dropped the link to the attendance sheet, so please go ahead and sign in while you're waiting. All right. Franny, what do you think? Do we have enough numbers to get started?
Yeah, I think so.
All
Yeah.
right. Again, welcome everyone. And I'm going to actually pass it over to Sohail to open us up before we dive into the content of the meeting.
Sounds good. Thanks, Renita, and good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome, everybody. Spring is here, and for some, that's like rejuvenation and a chance to reset a little bit. For other people, it's allergies. For CYBHI, what we're spending some time doing this spring is taking a critical look at data and trying to get a good sense of how the children and youth and families are faring. And so I just wanted to start by just letting you know over the course of the next several months or so, expect a whole lot of reports coming out, case study profiles looking at many of the counties that are actually here present today, as well as many more throughout the state of what implementation of CYBHI looks like, but more generally, like how the youth are doing in your particular counties. There will also be special topic reports on the fee schedule, on certified wellness coaches, on disparities, and an overall evaluation and a number of other pieces. But the one piece that is ready, seeing your note, Dr. Arakawa, wow, 109 degrees last week. Good gosh, yeah. Um, one piece that is ready that I wanted to share is a new data dashboard, and I'll put this link in the chat as well, so you can explore it a little bit. Just came out last week, and the idea behind it is simply that data. It's not an evaluation, so it doesn't provide much analysis, but you can get a sense of both like how the state overall is doing on various factors, but also your particular county. So if you go to this link at the bottom here, you'll see Explore Our Data Dashboard. And if you click on that, there's a whole lot of instructions just to help you navigate to it, through it, as well as a full Excel file of the different fields and the different ways that you can splice the data. So you get a sense of overall what's available. But here's the dashboard itself. And, I'll go through a few just as examples here. So if we're looking at all counties, and for example, with the metric or the category of suicide, there was new data released by the Department of Education from the California Healthy Kids Survey, and very excited to share this particular metric, which is, again, from the California Healthy Kids Survey, done over 2-year periods. It's done for grades 7, 9, and 11. This in particular just shows 9 and 11 here. But you can see the metric is students who reported seriously considering attempting suicide in the past 12 months. And it's the lowest it's been in actually more than a decade. I wouldn't say that the stresses in our world are getting better. So I'd like to think it's the supports, and that's a testament to all of you. And so I think that's very exciting news. Of course, all the metrics in composite will tell a more complete picture, but I'm sharing some information here of how to get at this. And then, probably even more relevant to many of you, is you can sort by county on specific metrics that are available at that level. So let's go to that 109-degree spring. So if you look at Imperial, and you take maybe, for example, school absenteeism, you can take a look at students who are chronically absent. And again, this is where anything in parentheses you have to change, and the instructions walk through that. But you can see, compared to California overall, over the past 10 years or so, Imperial County had a bigger spike during the pandemic when it came to students who were chronically absent, but now seems to be coming down relatively at a similar rate to the state, but still higher levels in the state overall. You could take a look at, let's say, emergency department visits in the county as well. And you can see, compared to the US overall, for any real visits to the emergency room for mental health or substance use issues, California, which is this darker blue line, has fared generally better. And Imperial County started in between and now is doing better than the state overall, although a little bit of a rise from 2023 to 2024. So different ways to splice out the data. Again, how one interprets it is a whole nother conversation, but a good place to start to unpack that, and particularly with regard to today's conversation, as we take this topic even deeper, wanted to share this new resource with all of you.
Perfect.
With that, I'll pass to you, Renita. Yeah. Good to be
Yeah,
with you.
thanks so much, Sohel. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, it's a great setup for the conversation we're going to have today. Great to see everybody. We're really excited to be diving into the content around Chapter 4 in the implementation guide. And we'll also be talking about what's coming next. Again, this is our sixth CLWG meeting of the year. If you haven't already, please do sign in. Karen dropped the link in. Wanted to start with a few reminders. The T2. Oh, sorry, I think I muted myself. I apologize. The T2 website is now up and operational, includes the first 2 chapters of the implementation guide. So we welcome you to visit it, and please do send other people to the website so they can learn more information about the work that we've been doing here to build an ecosystem of care. We've also, as we have shared previously, designed a T2 postcard, which I'm also going to drop in the chat. There you go. And this is to help spread the word about T2 and how to build an ecosystem. And so you can print this up for any conferences or meetings or other relevant gatherings you may be attending or hosting in the upcoming months. We've also begun our series of 4 webinars focused on T2 and the implementation guide, and these are being hosted by Breaking Barriers. The second one, which looked at Chapter 2, actually happened last Tuesday, and we'll be linking the recordings of these on the T2 website, but also want to encourage all of you to share the webinar flyer with your colleagues and other partners who are engaged with you. And I think, Karen, thank you for dropping that in. And this is going to be a great way to highlight the work and the process we've been talking about for the last 3 years. Just as a reminder, all the decks and materials we've used in the past meetings can be accessed in the CLWG Live Binder, which is maintained by the San Bernardino team, and we'll put that in the chat as well in case you need that. All right, so for today, just want
Sorry.
to, oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
Renita, my screen is acting up, so I apologize. I'm way ahead of you on the slides.
Oh, no worries. I will just skip. I'll just wait. I'll pause a beat, Brittany, while you get back to the meeting objectives and agenda.
Sorry.
There we go. Thanks, Brittany. All right, so this is our objectives for today. So we are going to spend some time really understanding community-defined data ethics and information sharing as a structural condition for building a strong ecosystem of care. And we're also going to spend time understanding what reciprocal accountability means using a dashboard dialogue tool. And so really excited to dig into that later. And then again, to just continue to build relationships amongst this group and some of our partner organizations. So here you have the agenda. So before we dive into the spotlight with Yolo County, we're actually going to get a quick update from Elizabeth on the demo county work. And then we'll dive into work that Yolo County has been doing around data. And then we're actually going to do some small breakout group work around data dialogues. And then we'll do some prep work for the next meeting and talk a little bit about the work that we'll be doing with youth experiential learning labs. Before we dive in, also want to remind you where we are in the arc of learning. So this is our March meeting, and we're doing part 2, focused on sustainability of our core practices. And then in our April meeting, we're really excited, and we're going to actually give you a chance to hear more about this, hear about the work and do a simulation with youth experiential learning labs. And then in May, we're going to focus on creating an 18-month implementation roadmap. And then by June, we're going to start wrapping up and celebrate all the great work you all have done and talk about lessons learned and what comes next. Okay, so for our April session, we are so excited about an opportunity to work with youth experiential learning labs, but we really need your help, and we're going to take some time at the end of today's meeting to gather information from all of you about what you want to be discussing during the in-person meeting. But one of the things we really need is we need 50 people for this simulation. And so we are really encouraging all of you to bring cross-agency partners to this meeting to make sure we can have enough people to run the simulation. And we also are going to engage in a World Cafe experience, and we need enough people to have enough topics to talk about. So really want to make sure we get enough folks to come to our in-person meeting. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Just to give you more information about the experience, we've actually invited Brian Blalock, who's a senior staff attorney at the Youth Law Center, which is a civil rights firm working in collaboration and on behalf of youth, and a co-designer of the experience. And he's going to give a little bit of history. And then Brittany, I can't see, is Maria on, or is it just Brian today?
I don't think Mariah's here. I think Brian's here. Brian, are you?
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
Okay, great.
Hi, yeah, Brian, if you want to come off mute and just talk about the simulation game, I think it'll be helpful for folks to hear what you all are planning so they can invite the right folks to come and join us next month.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So, everybody, I'm Brian. As mentioned, I'm an attorney by training. Before I was at Youth Law Center, I was the cabinet secretary over the Children's Behavioral Health, Child Welfare, and Juvenile Justice departments for the lovely state of New Mexico. It's great to see everybody. So we've been running the Youth Experiential Learning Labs since 2017. We had to take a break during COVID because it's a very much in-person experience. But the way it came about is we were looking for a way to help professionals better understand all of the youth serving systems and how they work together. And as I guess you guys know, maybe or not work together sometimes and work together sometimes. And we tried webinars and presentations and lectures and PowerPoint decks and interactive learning. And eventually we realized that what we were doing just wasn't very good. And so we brought in a bunch of young people with lived experience who helped us develop all of these things. And we ended up building what's essentially a huge game. Although when I say game, I don't want you to think of it as, well, certainly don't think of it as fun because you will be very disappointed. But it is an interactive activity that involves multi-level games inside of a room. Every single piece of it is developed with young people with lived experience in the child welfare, juvenile justice, or homelessness space, and many of them have experience in all three. The games are designed to help drive towards solutions and help people think creatively. At this point, we've run it over 80 times. We've done it with attorneys, with judges, with district attorneys, with public defenders, with mental health clinicians, with McKinney-Vento liaisons, with school staff, with legislators, with policymakers. We've run it all over the United States, and we've run it in 14 different countries at this point. We're headed to do it with the European Commission in Brussels in a few months. And one of the young people who went through it and helped us run it in Silicon Valley late last year had the great idea, thinking that it would be a really good experience for your team and help drive forward some of the things that you guys are working on, especially around services integration and kind of consumer-based services and what that might look like. So we're happy to do it. I know we have a date. And the thing about it, though, is it only runs if we have at least 50 people. So as mentioned before, we need at least 50 people in the room. We've done it for as many as 200 at a time. And so we're really looking to get folks there and in the room so that we can be able to run it. I'm happy to answer other questions, although I will say it's a little bit like Fight Club. not in the sense that it's violent, but in the sense that we don't talk about it outside the room because we think people get more out of it if they're not, if they don't know exactly what's going to happen in the room.
Thank you, Brian. I hope that has piqued people's interest. But does anybody have any questions? Brian is here for a few minutes. If anybody has questions, feel free to come off mute.
Let me maybe ask a broad question, Brian. What type of level of staff member would be appropriate for this? We're talking like senior leadership, frontline staff. What does it look like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So either in both, as long as we know. And here's why. So we've had directors, when we did it, we actually have a team in Wales, and we did it in Wales. We actually had their Prime Minister of Housing there. And so we did a big one, but it was a lot of line staff, and the line staff got a lot out of it. And one of the things they do now in Wales is on their child welfare side is they run these experiential learning labs as part of their trauma responsive training, as part of their core curriculum for their line staff. But then, because the Prime Minister of Housing was there and she was really interested in bringing together policymakers, we ended up going back and we did it with a big, huge group of her policymakers, and they used it for strategic planning to figure out what they wanted to focus on. And then we did follow-up sessions with them to build out kind of work planning on how to build those going forward. And so, because so much of the learning happens between the person and the experience that they're having, it's really for all levels.
Thanks so much, Brian. Any other questions from folks as you're thinking about who to bring to the meeting in April? Okay. Brian, thank you so much for hopping on. We really appreciate it. And we're hoping we'll get those numbers so we can do this really exciting simulation.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. All right. So again, today is the second of two sessions focused on Chapter 4 on sustainability practices. So we're going to do a connector and go into small breakout rooms for about 10 minutes or so. And the question that we want you to talk about in your small group is, what's one small win you've had in using data to drive a recent decision? And that could either be in your personal or your professional life. And we'll drop that question into the chat so you can take it with you to the breakout room. And so Jameen's going to send you off and you'll come back in about 10 minutes or so. We'll see you back here.
We've been doing interviews of the county, the demo counties that are doing this work on the ground to just learn what the cross-county themes are. You can go back one, Brittany. Yep, perfect. Thank you. Oh, right there. What the cross-county themes are in their work and really what our collective learnings are about their efforts, challenges, successes, and then what they're needing moving forward. So what we found is that the governance structures, and I think this is true of a number of you who are here who are not the demo counties, but I know doing this work, their governance is becoming more functional. So greater, as they dig into the work, greater clarity on roles, decision-making, and connections across structures. One of the demo counties has now connected their interagency leadership teamwork to the board of supervisors, and they're starting to build that nexus in their structures, which is really cool and new for them and just like an amazing evolution. Everyone talks about this work being grounded in relationships, and it is grounded in relationships, but those relationships are translating into real-time structural processes and functions that enable that coordination to be sort of baked into the structure, process, and functions of their work. So that's really exciting, and it's showing up in even case level problem solving, where across our agencies there are families and youth that are having challenges, and they're starting to build structures where they're starting to see progress in interagency solutions to real-time challenges for families and youth. So super exciting. The shared leadership is strengthening, but still really reliant on key individuals being champions of the work. And so there's really an interest in figuring out how to do something we've been talking about, which is building structures that hold this work so that they aren't entirely reliant on champions. They are the way we operate. They are the new norm of operational design into the future. The alignment work is revealing system gaps. So mapping existing interagency efforts or mapping existing support structures is starting to begin to enable them to see where they have duplication, where they have silos, where they have unmet needs that could be solved by another agency's resources, but because they didn't have that information sharing, they weren't able to really do that. And a concrete example of that was, substance use supports for young people in our schools, a very real challenge. But it was the conversation across education and behavioral health that really started to highlight some of those resources that are available in the behavioral health agency, but aren't as available in the education system. And so that enabled them to really build that out. Counties are entering early implementation on data sharing, both at the macro and the micro level, financing, braiding and blending financing and resources. And that actually, can be substance use services that are now being provided in the school because they now have this information sharing. And I was just in the past 10 minutes talking about family engagement, and that family engagement, one of the wins we talked about was really means by which to bring families in and take data on their engagement. And that building more and more parents coming to be a part of that meaningful conversation about why they're not engaged and how to get them more engaged. And then that is bridging into how do we build shared goals together. And actually some of the parents and youth are saying, well, the staff need support too. So really, really powerful work that's happening out there. And I really thank the counties for doing the work, all the counties who are here, because this is not easy work. What we need next, just still really getting clear on operational governance clarity, your roles, your structures, and your communication across bodies, so that you as an ecosystem really understand that. And ongoing need always for actionable tools, templates, for mapping, dashboard development, which we just did the webinar on Chapter 2. Sacramento did a phenomenal job of presenting their dashboard, and means by which to improve coordination either with youth and families or across our agencies. We really need to be in reportedly working on shared data approaches. So common metrics and practical data sharing strategies, both at the micro level and at the macro level. So you're talking about case sharing, case information sharing at an individual child level, all the way to a means by which to share your macro data to build shared dashboards and then do quality improvement and control based on those dashboards. These are all getting built out in the state. We have examples in the guide, and more. The evolution and the innovation is extraordinary right now, but something that's next, that's something that was identified as next. Financing, implementation, support, how to operationalize braided funding and billing structures, and what funding is available to support certain bodies of work or certain service delivery systems, or even what funding is available to support coordination across the agencies. So really concrete identification of that. Policy and practice alignment. So a really strong connection between the state's intention and interest in integration and the development of ecosystems, and the maximization of utilization of our resources and supports to children and families at the local level, and the local reality of the challenges of doing this work, and the need for support from the state to say, yes, like, we really want you doing this work, and here's the how. And then sustainable leadership models. So like coming back to what I said before, where we have progress moving into sustainable leadership models, but really leaning into, okay, let's get beyond individual champions and let's get into this being our new operational design. So that was our learnings. That's what's next. And again, just thank you so much for being here and the work.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for that update, and thank you to the demo counties for the continued work you are doing. We're going to dive into our next session, which is to really dig into community-defined data ethics and information sharing as a foundational structural condition for building a strong and shared ecosystem of care. And so this is really about sustainability. It's not about legal compliance, but in order to sustain our ecosystem, we really need to master the art of information flow, how to share what is needed while rigorously maintaining, while rigorously protecting what must be private. So while we've talked about data use before, when we're looking at the kinds of data we collect and how we use it in Chapter 2, those discussions focused mostly on macro data, the kind of data that is more publicly available and aggregates findings across a system of across a population. Today, we're going to look more closely at microdata, so that data that focuses on an individual child or family case. And that information is also really important for making clear, unified, effective decisions, but it is data that has stricter legal limitations. And so our spotlight today is going to focus on one county's efforts to incorporate such data into their decision-making. So one of the things that we know is that we really need to navigate this tension between utility and safeguarding data, right? So we need data, we need to share data for high quality integrated care coordination and to drive continuous quality improvement, which allows us to deliver on our shared vision. But at the same time, we need to uphold data ethics and privacy standards, which includes ensuring communities can help decide what data are collected and how stories and numbers are interpreted to protect youth and family trust. And so our work is really to create a data system that achieves both utility and safeguards data simultaneously. So to get at this structural challenge and reflect on ways to address it, we've invited Yolo County to talk about lessons learned from building cross-sector systems. They use microdata to create evidence that allows partners to hold each other mutually accountable for shared outcomes, and which can help directly strengthen the ecosystem. And so I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Garth Lewis, the superintendent of schools from Yolo County. He has been a member of the Collaborative Leadership Working Group. He's been an educator in Yolo County for 20 plus years and has a nearly 3-decade career in K-12 education. He has served as a paraeducator, teacher, site and district administrator, and he is the first African-American to be elected as county superintendent in Yolo County. So with that, I am so excited to turn it over to Dr. Garth Lewis to provide an overview of how they develop their innovation and to highlight some of their successes and some of their ongoing challenges.
Appreciate that, Ronita, and it's really good to be with all of you this morning in the room. Appreciate all the wisdom and the experience that's represented here. What I will say at the very onset is that today's conversation is going to be an exercise in transparency. We have not solved this challenge, and so we absolutely are running after it. But I'm happy to be here this morning to share some of the what we think about as our strengths, as well as opportunities for continued growth in this arena. If we can move to the next slide. What I'd like to do is just share a frame that's helpful for me. It's been helpful for me as I've worked in this cross-sector space. It was also helpful for me as I was a dissertation student and working towards completing my project, which focused on the use of cross-sector collaboration as a means of supporting post-secondary readiness for foster youth. And so I just, for those of you, some of you may be familiar with Nipsey Hussle. Others may not be, so I'll just do a brief introduction. Nipsey was a rap artist, but he was also a community builder, an entrepreneur out of South Los Angeles. He invested in his neighborhood in opening businesses, creating jobs, and really thinking about how to build opportunity from within the community, not just bring folks out or supports and resources from the outside. The reason I bring him into this conversation with us this morning is because I really appreciate how honest his perspective is related to this work as we think about community building or ecosystem building. His quote that this idea of sometimes you have to take 2 steps backwards to take 10 steps forward really resonates both with me, with this work, and I'm sure with many of you as well. Our work around data sharing, particularly at the micro level, I'm going to share my comments around this ecosystem building tool from our perspective around the use of or building out a closed loop referral system, which again we have not solved for, but we have some experiences that we think are worth at least sharing in this space. So as we get into this conversation, again, thinking about this idea of taking 2 steps backward in order to take 10 steps forward, the reason it resonates with us is because we're thinking about not hitting our targets, or what we may think about as failure, quote unquote failure. We're really trying to shift the thinking, the mindset around failure, and to really accept the idea that we're learning forward. We are, in fact, taking lessons from these experiences to build out what we think is going to be the strength and the durability of a system that ultimately will serve our children and families well into the future. We can move on to the next slide. So in Yolo County, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, in terms of governance, we do believe that we have a fairly strong governance structure. Our steering committee or our steering team is made up of our district superintendents. I chair that committee, and then the staff, my team here at the county office, as well as the director of behavioral health and the director of child welfare out of Yolo County Health and Human Services, they help to staff that steering committee. Our leadership teams from the county office and the Health and Human Services Agency also then help to facilitate the implementation team or the project implementation team, and that's made up of all of our cross-agency partners as well as district liaisons. So from a governance perspective, we do believe that we have a very strong structure. We have the many of the right folks in the room. We know that we have a gap in terms of youth and family voice in those spaces, and that's an area that we need to continue to work to strengthen. In terms of disruptions that we've experienced over time, as I'm sure has been the case in some of your context, leadership turnover has been a challenge for us. And so, again, as Elizabeth mentioned in her opening comments, this idea of really working towards succession planning as well as supports to help with onboarding new folks into the system is a challenge that we're taking on. Obviously, funding uncertainty is a challenge for us as well, as many of our grants are sunsetting, or one-time dollars are sunsetting, and we're bringing on and ramping up our efforts around the multi-payer fee schedule and Medi-Cal billing. We still have a need for bridge funding and support across our system. And then in terms of communication, we can never get away from communication as a discipline, and so we continue to work in that space as well. The final thing I'll just mention on this slide, in terms of the clear roles across districts and partners, we are codifying. We have moved towards codifying those roles so that there's again, from a calibration perspective, an opportunity for us to really spell out specific roles and responsibilities, timelines, and that's helped to really strengthen our collaborative partnership from a governance perspective. Move to the next slide, please. So the challenge that we have accepted is around developing shared meaning. When we were defining success, it took us a little while to recognize the fact that we were really defining success in very different terms from a behavioral health perspective as compared to a school system perspective. In our school system, we absolutely are chasing those academic outcomes, grades, test scores, credits, access to dual enrollment, access and completion of AP courses, all those pieces that we think about as the core tenets and accountability components of the educational enterprise. We also realize that we think about behavioral data in very different ways. From a school perspective, we oftentimes are concerned with and prioritize behavioral data that is external facing. So the student who's getting up and walking out of the classroom, a fight, someone who has cussed out a teacher, those externalizing data, those externalizing behaviors, whereas it often is the case with our teams with behavioral health. Not only are they concerned with that, but also those internalized behaviors, right? That anxiety and depression, things that we are becoming more and more familiar with and sensitive to in the school system. But I'll say that for us in Yolo County, at least, there's been a learning curve around that. And then this idea of clinical outcomes, that's a whole nother that's a new language for us. To really think about how students are progressing along the continuum of healing and their progress towards sort of being stepped down from intensive support services into tier 2 or even tier 3 universal services, and the ways in which that happens, particularly when we have not yet, again, solved for this sort of individual student data at a case management level. So those have been challenges for us in terms of, again, this idea of shared meaning. We can move to the next slide. I use the word calibration now. Calibrate, so much so that my staff has given me a swear jar. And so every time I use the word calibrate, I've got to put a little money in the swear jar. But that has this idea of constantly spending time ensuring that when we walk out before we walk out of a room, that we in fact are on the same page. For us has proven to be an incredibly important discipline. I became recently aware of Rita McGrath's work in this space, and she says in complex environments, you don't build something once and sustain it forever. You have to continuously adapt. And those words of wisdom are really foundational for us. So if I think about the mindsets that we are now walking into conversations with across agencies and across sectors, we are walking in with a mindset of calibration, that in fact is a core discipline, just as much as we think about communication or as we think about any other discipline related to this work. We're asking ourselves questions about data. What are we assuming about outcomes? What are we assuming about the data that's important to each of our systems and the roles that we play? And over time, do those realities or what we perceive as realities continue to hold true over time, or are there shifts in those spaces that we need to acknowledge and respond to. You can move to the next slide. So where does this mean for us as we think about the work here in Yolo County and what our next steps are? So there are 4 shifts that we've begun to talk about, and I mentioned one earlier. If you can click ahead to it just once. Go ahead, one more, sorry. Yes, so shift number 1, this idea of shared meaning as core infrastructure. I think what we've learned is that from a structural perspective, again, from in terms of governance, what we've had to shift and adjust our priorities around is this idea that we at each level of the governance structure and then across our systems within sort of parallel level responsibilities, that shared meaning has to be a core consideration. In other words, when I think about, and I'll give you one example of this. I have a district trustee who recently shared with me that he is a bit skeptical about the county's ability and the state's ability to help solve local issues because the context is so nuanced. Their history, their players, the politics, right, on the ground are so nuanced. And he and I have a great relationship, and so he's sharing with me, Garth, with all due respect to your work, I remain skeptical about your ability and the state's ability to affect the kind of change that you are looking for. And here's the reason why. He shared with me 50 years of educational outcome data. We look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, 50 years of educational outcome data. Over that time, at a national, at a state, and at a local level, very little has changed. So regardless of who's been in charge, regardless of how much money has been invested, regardless of how many new sort of initiatives have been introduced, we've continued to produce relatively the same results over the last 5 decades, right? And so his argument to me is that our system is designed to get those results. His question then is, what are you going to do at the county level to help ensure that we transform the system, right, in a way that challenges the results that we're currently getting? And so for him, as a trustee who's responsible for setting direction, who is accountable to his electorate, right, he shared with me that where he is currently, if you can't convince me of that, and I can't demonstrate to my constituents, I'm ready to step down from the board. That is the level of accountability he's accepting as an individual, which I appreciate and respect. And I've assured him that I am working diligently, and we're going to work together to make the shifts that are necessary. So I share again that idea of shared meaning is super important as a core consideration. Data sense making, that we transition from simply collecting data to really sense making collectively. In our county, because we are still struggling or challenged by the case level data and sharing across systems for the reasons that Renita mentioned earlier in terms of the protective pieces from a legal perspective, we're sort of taking an old school approach, analog approach to a degree, where each of us is developing our own sets of data that we can legally view at the individual level, and then we're sharing that at a macro level with one another across those systems. So it is not a perfect solution by any means, but it's getting us to a point where we're spending time sense making together. Next slide, or next shift. Designing for turnover, I mentioned this earlier, this idea that we really have leaned into this idea that none of us are going to be around forever. And we have to make sure that our succession planning and onboarding systems are structured in such a way that we can bring folks on more easily than we have in the past. And a tool that we're using, we actually have an actual succession planning tool that we're using within the County Office of Education to support this effort as leaders are transitioning out of our system. And then the fourth and final tool, I mentioned this already, recalibration as routine. We are utilizing a number of structures to assist us with this. Internally, we have a structure that we call Lunch and Learn. This is a time for our internal teams across systems, across departments, to come together on a quarterly basis. We break bread together, and we're also looking at our practice around communication and critical collaboration in terms of our large projects that are across sectors and pain points that we're experiencing, as well as best practices. So this is an opportunity for us to turn the lens really internal, or I would say mirror internally, to take a look at our own practice and how we're showing up as a contributing partner in collaborative spaces. And then the last, if you click one more time for me, you can click all through 3 more times. There you go. One more. Thank you. And so the questions that we're asking ourselves in those sessions are: what outcomes still matter? What do we value now? And what needs to shift? That's a way for us to walk away from those lunch and learn sessions, better able to show up in those collaborative spaces and hold ourselves internally accountable to being a contributing partner. Next slide. So what I'll end with is, we have launched a pilot in one of our school districts, Washington Unified School District, with the closed loop referral system. As is mentioned in the draft of Chapter 4, we are working with an organization, OPICA, on this work, and they're I'm going to say they're probably as good as anyone out there right now in terms of their system, the technology that we're discussing. The thing for us that we've had to do is, as we've actually put a pause on some of that work, because we've realized that we have to, in the human space, spend some time calibrating around these outcomes and working through our agreements in advance of layering on top of it this technological solution. Some of you may have come to that realization earlier than us, but this is our path. And so we've had to spend some time really, again, calibrating and codifying our agreements and our commitments around outcomes, data, expectations, and roles. And so one last example of a way that we're doing this now is that we've established a work group that is focused on taking a look at multiple data sets all at once and different streams of work, whether it's through CalHope, our work with PBIS, our work here with CYBHI, and we're leveraging that work group to help us with identifying and defining those outcomes, again, within the school system, and then sharing those with our partners with Health and Human Services as a means of calibrating on our shared data. And so we anticipate by the end of this school year, we will have our list of those data that we're working on together and ways in which we intend to use those. And that's the launching point then for the agreements that we intend to act on in the fall. That is the final slide for me.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
You bet.
This was so amazing, and I really appreciate your time joining us here today. And really appreciate, all the good work you're leading and just your transparency and what's working and kind of what you're also hearing on the ground. I thought what you talked about with your district trustee and his reaction, right? And his lived reality is really important for us to keep in mind. We have a few minutes. Welcome folks to either come off mute if you have any questions for Dr. Lewis or any reflections on what he said, or you can drop those in the chat. So I want to give folks an opportunity to ask any questions you might have.
I have a question. Dr. Lewis, Navdeep Purewal from Sacramento County Office of Education. Thanks so much for sharing. My question is, you mentioned the pilot of how you are getting down to kind of that student family level data and are sharing across kind of agencies in your county. How are you doing that? How are you getting kind of that data share? And how many students are we talking about or cases? And what's been that process?
Yeah, so it continues to be challenging, Navdeep. So again, let me just start with that. And we're at River City High School, and so we're talking. I haven't seen the most recent numbers, but between 50 and 60 students is what we're talking about right now at that sort of what we think about as our tier 3 level. The we continue to hold the owner of the data, if you will, and I'm using that ownership word in a very crude manner, so I apologize for that. I mean, no disrespect at all, but those who are responsible, who have true accountability for those data, we continue to hold those in our own container, if you will. So child welfare is holding their own data. We are holding our own data. We know who we're serving, and because we aren't able to get at that case level or the individual family level, we're sharing sort of in a aggregate way right now the impacts of those data. And so to be clear, we have not yet really cracked the solution for sharing at that case level, sharing data at the case level as of yet. But we are working towards it.
Okay, thank you so much.
You bet.
Thanks, Navdeep, for that great question. Saul, I did see your hand raised. Did you still want to jump in?
A very similar question, actually. So thanks, Nav, and thank you, Superintendent Lewis. Given the challenges and the ongoing work on that level of data, you also mentioned aggregated, kind of de-identified data. I'm wondering if you just give an example of how that played out in one of the lunch and learns and what that looked like.
So though we actually use a different structure for that aside from the lunch and learn, but what we call our lead agency team. So this is our Health and Human Services, and our teams come together. What Health and Human Services is sharing with us are data from our contractors. So Health and Human Services holds all the contracts for our service providers. So they are sharing with us those data at that level. In the school system, we know also who is at the tier 3 level, who's been referred. We know who's being seen by CommuniCare or whomever. We're pulling those data as it relates to attendance, suspensions, grades. So we're pulling those data, and because that's data we own, we're able to then provide a presentation and an analysis from our perspective on how those students are doing. Now, we haven't cross-referenced, right, because we're using de-identified aggregate data, but we can assume that many of those students are the same, if that makes sense.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, Health and Human Services is basically telling you this is what we're learning about kids who are using intensive services. and without telling the names or details there. And you're saying, we know the kids who are using intensive services, and this is what we can tell you on attendance in those pieces. And very likely there's a huge overlap in that Venn diagram. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Very inefficient, incredibly inefficient, but it just speaks to the importance and the value. And for us, what it allows us to do is have at least an exercise, again, in that meaning making together. Our board of supervisors are, as maybe is the case in many areas, dealing with a structural deficit right now. So from a budget perspective, it's very important for us to demonstrate the value of this project because they are also providing funding towards our K-12 partnership in this space. And so this has really ramped up the prioritization of working in this way as we work towards data sharing agreements, which we're in that process right now. We're looking at we likely will take more of an umbrella approach where the County Office of Ed will facilitate the data sharing agreement with Health and Human Services on behalf of our school districts.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
So this is such a great setup for what we're going to talk about next, which is around reciprocal accountability and how we use shared data, humanized by lived experiences to hold ourselves mutually accountable. So Dr. Lewis, thank you again for sharing the work of Yolo County. This has been incredible. Again, there's the vignette in chapter 4, but I think just this dialogue is so rich and I hope we can keep it going. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Brittany to move us into our next activity.
Thank you, Renita, and thank you again, Dr. Lewis. That was really great. So just connecting back to what Dr. Lewis just talked about and what we've been talking about a little bit is, we're going to move on to what in chapter 4 is sustainability practice for reciprocal accountability. And this is the idea, really, we just got a great example of this, but how do you make your data visible so that all the partners are understanding what's going on and are understanding the performance and how they're doing with each other and for the communities that they're serving. So the idea is that not so much about evaluation, but about accountability, reciprocal amongst each other, and not so much about a compliance, but about what does this data tell us and how can we then move forward and make plans. So nothing new under the sun here, but what we're going to talk about today is a process to do this. You've heard one great example from Dr. Lewis. We're going to invite Richard Connect, who's done some work with other counties also around their data and talking about it. And we're going to just highlight a tool that's also in chapter 4, a dashboard dialogue tool. Like all the templates and tools, I would say in the implementation guide, these are there to give you a structure that you then make your own. So it's not there to necessarily oversimplify the work. You'll see this tool looks pretty simple, but I think we just heard Dr. Lewis talk about how those conversations happen, and it's not a one and done, but it is to sort of give you a structure to work with and make your own. So when we show that to you, please keep that in mind. But the idea again, and this is a theme here in this particular CLWG meeting, is we must have shared data to create shared solutions. If the data isn't seen by all, then how do we actually use it and keep the work moving? So you will find all this material in the live binder, and I think there will also be links in the chat from Renita, but basically I'm gonna share the actual tool, so bear with me for a second while I show you the tool. You will see this when you in chapter 4. So but basically, again, it's very simple, but the idea is that you're going to do a little prep beforehand. So you want to think a little bit before your dialogue conversations about what indicators you might want to focus on over time from the dialogue. And then you want to look into preparing some of the stories, either from youth or family or from frontline staff, so that you've got a kind of a qualitative what's actually happening around the numbers. And then simple visuals. So this sort of gives you an idea of how to prep for these data dialogue conversations, and then gives you an idea about how to move through discussing the data, looking at the human parts of the data and translating those insights into practice. Again, it's very basic, but again, it's a structure that you can build for yourselves. And then some notes for facilitation. So we're going to walk through this process using a sample data set that we've created. But first, I'd like to turn this over to Richard, who has been doing some of this work with various counties and is going to model for us some conversations he's had with other real life counties. So Richard, let me turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Brittany. Really appreciate that. And good morning, happy Monday. Simple is the value of the day, right? When it comes to data, there are so many obstacles to creating an alignment of meaningful data and creating accountability that's authentically reciprocal. Brittany, if you've got that deck accessible still, let's go to that one slide as kind of a grounding before we jump into a quick look at one example. I think it's the slide after the one you left us off on. There we go. Thank you. So just for context and kind of level setting, the efforts that we have made underneath the AB 2083 system of care development in the last few years with a number of counties, 4 or 5, are grounded in these kinds of awarenesses. So we always encourage interagency partners to start with their existent publicly available data. The reason for that is no one's got time or money for chasing new data. At least under 2083, it wasn't funded and it wasn't required, right? And if it's publicly available, if those matrices are already in the ecosphere, if you will, then you can skip the legalities, right? Your lawyers won't create obstacles to you using that data because it's already out there. We try to start these conversations with either a logic model, if the county interagency team started with a logic model. If they didn't do that, they all have started with a vision or mission that's captured within their system of care MOU in this case. And so we start with that. How are we going to make meaning out of that? How are we going to measure whether we're being true to that vision or mission? So it's very high up in the stratosphere, right? But we start with that vision and say, well, how do we know that mission or vision is coming to fruition? We encourage the interagency leadership teams, and again, much or all of this is captured within the chapters 3 and 4 of the guide that y'all have put eyes on, and that's in final form here. We form a work group and invite, in most cases, the quality management or CQI staff as needed. Often the interagency leadership team members don't necessarily have the detailed awareness about what their data is or how to make meaning of it. And so you want to get QM staff there. We start with that work group and we orient to one another's data. So it's largely an inventory, right? What are the various data points that you have that are publicly available, that you have at your fingertips, that are already being used? And there's that word again. We keep it simple for the reasons we've already identified. The next step is often to conduct analysis to highlight the correlations. Once we have those data points identified and we begin tracking, and I'll show you an example here from Kings County in a moment, then we do some very rudimentary analysis. Sometimes we find ourselves as consultants doing that for the executive advisory committee or the ILT ahead of time once or twice to kind of model for them what's apparent and what I think most of us experience growing up in one segment of the system is that we're not facile with other people's data points, right? If we didn't grow up in welfare, we don't know what reentry to welfare means or what factors influence it necessarily. If we didn't grow up in probation, in youth corrections, we don't attend to the daily census or the number of 602 status kids that are actually out of home, right? Like that's not our world. And so you have to help them do some analysis to begin to see where the connection points are. Really critically, and this is still aspirational for most counties because we're just a year or so into it. We offer feedback to the ILT or the Executive Advisory Committee, and we challenge those ILT members to use the data, right? Like it's one thing to have some data points. It's another thing to actually use it for decision making, which is where we, I think, are in most of our county work, and that's a struggle at this point. And obviously want to encourage people to celebrate the wins within the data that comes from the analysis. Brittany, thanks. Let me go ahead and if you want to grant me screen sharing capacities, I will walk you all through the King's data here with their permission. So I told you it was simple, and it is. So in most cases, we use a Google Sheets. In Tuolumne, they're using Airtable. Sacramento has a little more sophisticated product, but the most simple and easy way to get started is with some place to drop your data. And after engaging with the partners and their QM staff, their quality management staff, these are the matrices that they identified. And there are about 24 or so in Kings County. And we've color coded this so that these olive colored indices are the behavioral health indices that come from the Mental Health Authority. The goldenrod are probation. The blue are welfare. The what color is that? Somebody help me with that. I am colorblind.
Salmon.
Salmon colored.
Salmon.
That's right. Thank you. The salmon come out of the County Office of Education, and the more acute green color come to us from the Central Valley Regional Center. So remember, these are the 5 partners who are obligated to the interagency work underneath 2083, which is why these are the partners we started with in this example. All right. And we give them all access to the Google Sheets. Most of them can get there. If there's a firewall for Google, then we do that for them. They send us the data and we drop it in. You'll notice down here at the bottom, there are some tabs. And this first tab that we're on right now, we affectionately call the dashboard source of truth, because it makes it easy for the partners to know that's where I drop my raw numbers every quarter. So they don't drop theirs into these further sheets that are specified with them. We'll get to those in just a second. We want them to put their data in here. It's from a management standpoint. We'll just call out also this spreadsheet. The utility of this in its simplicity again is there's a column here for the source of that data so that they know where they go get it, right? Like if someone changes jobs, if there's a promotion or a movement internally, then this is a reminder of where were we getting that data piece before? And then there's a place to put some notes if they choose to. The first 2 columns of data, B and C, are now aggregated. They've been gathering data since mid-2022 as part of their system of care work. So they do have some trend lines in some cases. And so the first 2 data points, and you'll see these on the little line graphs that we'll look at in just a second. And so we highlight the fact that those are annualized averages. And then beginning with the 3rd data point, we're still in a quarterly visual. So that's where we're dropping data. And then each of the 5 partners has their own little place where the data migrates. So same indicators, same data points. And then what Google Sheets does magically is gives us a little visual. Is this large enough that you can see it? Should I make it bigger? A little bit bigger. So line 2 translates to that first graph right there. This guy right here. And you can see the trend over time, right? Back to, well, their early data, their aggregated data was not present, at least on this data point. But you can see how these numbers translate to a very simple, very rudimentary visual graphic. And so I'm going to orient you just to each one of these really quickly and then talk to you a little bit about the process of meaning making. So here's the next set. This is the probation data. They're tracking the total number of kids in probation that are in foster youth status. Of that number, how many are in placement? And then the number of PACT assessments that they do in probation. Here's the welfare data, children and youth entering foster care, a reentry rate, and they're struggling with that data point. There's a data point monitoring placement changes. There's a data point monitoring the number of kids getting family maintenance, which is a court status, the number out of home, and then foster youth and residential services, and the number of foster youth placed outside of Kings County. They wanted to take a particular look at that, given that they're Kings and that they have a high preponderance of non-government organizations providing foster, like FFA, foster family agencies, or residential care in their county. And you know that you all experience this, there are obligations both federally and state to monitor foster youth status, both as to education and access to behavioral health care. And Kings, to their credit, wanted to take this extra step, even though those are, not our kids per se. They wanted to know what the impacts were in their county. Similarly, on the education side, you can see their data points. And we'll come back to one of these in a minute or two, because one of them is kind of interesting. And then the regional center. While these data points are all relatively basic, the meaning comes from them. And I'm going to show you this first, and we'll come back here. The meaning comes from these. And the power of this conversation is that it's the first time many of the partners in the ILT or the Executive Advisory Committee have actually been invited to look at other people's data in relationship to their own. And by that, what I mean is in behavioral health, and we do this through some very rudimentary analysis, we look at this number of kids, for instance, who are this graph right here, the number of youth in foster care who are getting outpatient behavioral health services. And you'll notice this blue line that's trending upward, which in most cases is going to be a positive indicator, right? Like we want more foster youth to get access to behavioral health care. If you're familiar with the legacy KDA versus Bonta class action lawsuit from many years ago, it was fundamentally based on the idea that we weren't getting behavioral health care to foster youth, right? So if that number is going up, that's a good thing. And what we want to watch for then is in probation and welfare, are there correlational indicators that would suggest that that's having an impact? And so if we look at the probation indicators, we actually note that there's a declining number of youth in placement in Kings County. So not by causation, but by correlation, we might deduce, right, or suggest that this downward trend in number of youth placed out of home could be influenced positively by the number of youth getting behavioral health care on an outpatient basis. Does that make sense? And then if we go to welfare, we're going to take that same behavioral health indicator and we're going to look for any correlational index. So could it impact the number of children and youth entering foster care? Yeah, it could, right? And there's indicators in here, there's numbers in here that suggest maybe not, at least for a couple of quarters, although they had a significant decline back in the first couple of years. You'll note, however, that there's a declining number of placement changes over here on this third graph, which could also correlate closely or potentially with the number of kids getting access to outpatient behavioral health care. So this is the kind of meaning making that comes when EAC or ILT partners are invited into conversation. And then I will show you quickly the kind of support we have sometimes offered, in which we think is useful to helping them begin to understand how to use their data. We just call this their analysis, right? And so there's a couple of contexts and caveats in here. Be careful about making meaning out of simple data. It's correlational, not causational, right? And then we have some comments on a couple of the data points that they're wrestling with. And then we link the dashboard in case they want that. And then here are the conversation starters. So very similar to what we just talked about. We bring this document, we give it to the EIC ahead of time, and we invite them to ponder on it and become prepared to talk about whether or not this stuff is true or not, and what we might have missed in our early analysis. So we just call out the same things we just looked at. It's just basic analysis in here, right? We suggest that their out-of-home placement stability could be a sign that their interagency placement committee, their child and family teaming, their kin-focused care, or other interagency work is actually having an impact at keeping youth at home, which is a huge win. That's the purpose of the system of care, is to keep kids at home, in school, and out of trouble, right? All whole child, whole person, whole student efforts are about that. Because our CLWG crowd has a lot of education experts, I'm going to point out one of these that I think we noticed. So notice bullet number 3, and we'll go back and look at this again. Students placed out of home via IEP have trended upward in recent quarters. And what we suggest to them is it invites dialogue about whether those youth were known to other system partners and whether the interagency placement committee conversation or other similar kinds of work that each county is obligated to could have been used potentially to address that, right? So let me go back and show you what that looked like from a data standpoint. This graph right here, the youth with individualized education plans and ED status, you can see it's doubled from 2 to 4 over a short period of time. Now, those numbers aren't statistically significant, but they're financially significant, right? If those kids both happen to be in the same district, that district's going to burn through its special ed budget in a matter of months, right? And other partners have responsibility for understanding how they can impact that. Those are our kids too, right? And so that's the kind of conversation that we try to instill and yield in this, again, very simple, rudimentary conversation around getting to early impacts of interagency work. One way of doing it. There are many others, I'm sure. And Elizabeth and I have had a couple conversations recently where she's reminded me of the potential power of technology here, right? Like we're way into AI-driven tools where you could probably short circuit this process, which I will say honestly takes anywhere from 6 to 18 months to convene the group, to get together, to do the inventory, to have the inventory, have them walk through, select their matrices, and then populate the data is a laborious process, but we probably have tools available to help us get to the finish line way quicker. Let me pause there, catch my breath, take any early conversations, and then I think we're going to get to some breakouts and do some little bit of practice with this, I think is the intent. Elizabeth, what did I miss?
You didn't miss anything. I thought you did a great job of highlighting the power of gathering our cross-agency data, but then doing this crosswalk to make meaning. And you actually, I think, just highlighted what we're going to be doing, which is looking at a dashboard and then taking the community's voice and putting it in that dashboard. And that makes me think, Richard, about, I've been saying for a while now, we may have a reduction of children in child welfare or even probation in our counties with a corollary uptick in IEP out-of-home placement. And so what does that mean. And if we're together as agencies, we can have that conversation. Like Garth, to your point with your board member who's saying, how can you help, right? Because it's so local. That's the sort of analysis that can really help. And it's very hard for, every single school district to have this conversation with the other agencies, but you can at that county level and say, wait a second, like, what's going on? You might be reporting that this is like great, and for us, this is going up, and how do we tackle it together? So thanks, Richard. It was great.
Yeah. Thanks, Elizabeth. And I've neglected to say as part of my reflections that the community engagement part of this is still aspirational and contingent on the ILT's capacity to listen and to find the venue to take the data, right? Unless within the ILT there are persons with lived experience who are connected to like the mental health, alcohol, and drug board or the local community schools development, right? Like if the parents and youth are not in that, and are not in all counties, right? If we're honest, then the ILT has to figure out a way to take this data and go out with it, right? So the community engagement that it should inform this is still, again, aspirational, in development, if you will.
Yeah, and I would just say in our breakout earlier, I was talking to Imperial about some of the family engagement work that they're doing and forums that they're building, and more parents are coming to these forums, and the possibility of then taking, data, just walks and discussions, Richard, into these existing forums versus trying to create something new in order to do that. So
yeah. Yeah, by way of really quick example, a couple months back, when we had a county going through their data and they do have a parent with lived experience that sits on their EAC, and he is constantly helping build accountability for the public systems. He almost every month he makes comments about, hey, you guys are not doing this yet. And when he saw the dashboard and realized that there actually had been some consistent, sustained gains in a couple of areas, it helped him begin to rewrite his narrative so he can then communicate to the field that he engages with that, you know what, the county's making progress in some areas, right? So it can be powerful in a number of ways. Brittany?
Yep. Thank you very much, Richard. All right, we are going to move you into 2 breakout groups. You're going to be sent to the breakout groups. One will be led by Richard, one will be led by Elizabeth. And we are going to look at, you all have in the chat, and I'm going to copy it again, the sample data. So this is fictionalized, but Elizabeth and Richard are going to be using that to take you through it's a bit of a simulation role play, but a bit of a discussion about how to look at that data, what you would pull out from it, how to think about it, and structure a conversation like we've had modeled by Richard today. So we are going to send you into these breakouts. We are going to come back at 10:45. And Renita, am I forgetting anything?
Yeah, I think you're good.
I think that's it. All right, so Jameen's gonna send us all into those breakouts, and yeah, enjoy. If you scroll down, you'll find the 2 groups, and so actually, Jameen, we're sending people, they're not picking. It's a random 2 groups. Okay.
am I looking at this right? Mine says close all rooms. I don't know. Here we go. I got it.
Janine, can you switch me to Elizabeth's room? I think Brittany's going to go with Richard.
That was a very speedy little glimpse at the data tool. Appreciate you all. And yeah, sorry. Sorry that was so short. We can certainly, if you all are interested in diving into this again, we can certainly do this at one of our upcoming meetings and really spend more time really working through the tool again. So drop us a note in the chat or an email. I'm happy to, think of this, run this session, a similar session again. All right, we are going to move to, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Really appreciate everyone's wisdom today. It was super thoughtful and I think a lot for us to build on. I'm going to go ahead and start to close us out. As we said, we're going to put a registration form for the April session in the chat. It would be great to get I know there are some issues around travel and funding and so forth. It would be great to get an idea, if you wouldn't mind, all of you, if you're planning to come, could you just put a yes in the chat? If you're not planning to come, could you put a no? This will help us with numbers. Even if you have not registered yet, it would really help us I don't know why to get an idea of how many of you are able and interested in coming. Also, let me just, we've continued to build out the agenda. So this is now what it's looked like. There are some folks that we have not yet talked to, so this is still draft, but did want to share our upcoming our agenda for April. As Brian Blaylock said, we're going to run this experiential simulation / game in the morning. It's about a 3-hour process. It's an hour and a half for the game experience and then about an hour and a half for a debrief. As he said, they don't tell us too much about it, so we've given them a frame about what we're doing here and transforming together, and they're going to shape it. And we've had some input into the shaping of the debrief and so forth, but it's also a mystery to us in a way about how it runs. We just have a lot of feedback that it's very powerful. So anyway, we're going to have this youth experiential learning lab in the morning, go to lunch, and then we're going to do a World Cafe. And we sent out a little explanation about what that is, but and I'll talk about that in a minute. Then we're going to end. There's optional time if the demo counties want to meet with your coaches. Then we're starting the next day. We're going to do some thinking about sustainability and scale, and thinking about what that means. I know there have been a lot of conversations about transforming together and what's going to happen, but also we want to think more broadly about just continuing the work. There was a lot of good stuff brought up today about that as well. And then again, I have not asked anyone yet about this, but what we'd love to do is have a panel discussion with the 4 demo county leads to reflect on the work that you all have done over the past 3 years in this work, lessons learned, challenges, etc. And then we'll close at lunch, again, leaving time for folks to travel home, or also another option to have a demo county meeting with your coaches. So that's what the agenda looks like. As Brian mentioned at the outset, and Renita too, it'd be great. We feel like this youth experiential learning lab is a really great opportunity to build interest and urgency in cross-agency partners. If you feel like that's something you need, this might be something to bring your cross-agency partners with. And that includes not just the demo counties, but any of the other CLWG members who are interested in building this work. Want to move on to the World Cafe. Again, I don't know how many of you have done one of these, but it's a big room. There's like 10 or 12 tables. Each table has about 5 or 6 people. We're going to rotate you. You'll have an opportunity to rotate 3 times, spend about 25 minutes at a table. And the idea is that you can come together to explore all kinds of things at these tables. And so what we're looking for is a sense of what it is you'd like to talk about. Is there a question around building ecosystems of care or around any of the kinds of things we've talked about in the CLWG that you want to revisit and talk with this group? Is there a tool that you've developed that actually has been really useful in your work that you'd love to share with people? Is there something you're thinking about, some kind of solution you're thinking about, and you'd like to get some thought partnership on it? All these ideas are fair game for the World Cafe. So what we'd like to do is have you do a quick think about a topic. I'm going to put a Google Doc in the
I put it
chat.
in already, Brenny.
Oh, it's in already. So
Yep.
please go ahead and go to that doc and see, you know, if you have some ideas, that would be the place to add it. And are there any questions? We're going to just go to the doc for now. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to just add in, brainstorm your ideas, your questions, your thoughts, and then we'll come back. But any questions?
Brittany, I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. If people can come with their like agency partners, if that's at all possible, that would be great. But I didn't realize that the YXL is Brian Blaylock's work, who I've known for a long time. And their work is phenomenal, really digging in on the ground to the experiences of young people and families and being able to bridge that to those that are supporting them. So yeah, I have never been to this, but I think it's going to be incredible. So.
Quick technical question. When I go to the live binder to the World Cafe generator, it's a Excel spreadsheet that downloads. Is that a shareable document or?
You can go to the link I put in. So I'll drop it in again because that one is a shared doc.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Thanks, Dennis. We have some folks who can't get into Google Docs, so we're navigating this with Live Binder and Google, and we'll compare on the back end. Registered 3 times. Someone have a question? Take about one more minute. If you're having trouble getting into either of those documents, I'll take it ideas in the chat as well. Okay, thank you all. Keep those ideas coming. I'm just going to go ahead and close us out. Just a few reminders about upcoming things. We have those webinars. If you have not yet registered and you'd like to, there's a link in the chat. Please go ahead and register for the April meeting if you are coming and have not yet registered. We do need a head count. So I think that link's in the chat too. And then there is a wellness conference led by the San Bernardino team, which is also a link that you can register for. Registration's open. It's July 22nd to 24th. I believe you're also looking for sponsors. Does anyone from the San Bernardino team want to say anything about this event?
No, Brittany, again, the registration is open. Again, it's at Disneyland Hotel. Another opportunity just to build the strength of our practitioners and our educators as we move into the new school year. So sponsorships, all those opportunities are there as well. So just you're available and able to register and come enjoy the conference.
Awesome. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Renita, have I missed anything?
I think we're good.
All right. Thank you all very much. It was lovely to see you all. Thanks
Good to
for the
see you all.
presenters today.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Everybody, thanks.